ये ले जाओ ना। तो आ जाओ फिर गरम गरम आ जाओ बेटा।
क्या था?
हाँ जी
Live session 1 updated agenda. Yeah.
Morning, Sai. Can you hear me?
Good morning.
Hi, Malika.
Hi.
Malika, whose office are you from?
So I'm here as an MC, so I would be hosting.
Anil wrote to me, correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm from ICT.
Well, I heard that you handle BD for ICT.
Yeah. So we have a nanomedicine research group, and I do a BD part in our lab.
Excellent. Manu, have you been able to test audio for Mr. Sai Prasad from Bharat? Manu, can you hear me?
Yes, just give me a moment. I'm here.
Yes. Okay. So good morning. You're able to hear, sir?
Yes.
Yeah, we're able to hear you well.
Yes, sir. There is a muted on this situation.
Yeah, good. Just wanted to make sure that.
Sure.
So Sai will be facing which side?
Sai sir is going to sit this, ma'am. This is a chair.
But then we will see his side frame, no? Can
Yes.
Can you
I'll
change
just,
the camera in a way that it is in front of him? It's right now facing the whiteboard, not him.
okay, I'll do that. Once as soon as Sai sir will come, I can focus. Zoom
Yeah,
in,
towards the chair actually, right? If you just turn it towards
I can do that.
chair,
I
it'll
can
be
do
fine.
that.
Versus the whiteboard.
Sure.
Yeah, we can tell you once it's angled right. Yeah.
Sure, sure.
Morning, Mahima. Morning, Kapil.
Hi, good morning, Pushpa.
Morning, Kapil. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, I can.
We have a few now. So I just stepped out for a minute. He'll be back.
Is it? Watching it. Is it on?
Pushpa, can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you well.
All right.
How are you?
Good, doing well, hectic.
I'm glad.
Busy is good.
Everybody in the world
times.
wants vaccine companies to be busy, so we can all be safe.
I don't know if we are maintaining our sanity or we're going mad trying to be busy.
I don't know. I was chatting with Dr. Harsha as well a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying the same thing.
Sometimes I feel that this is a good thing that we are so busy because staying at home during this pandemic would be crazy.
Yeah.
But
No, that's true. I think we all have a lot to be thankful for.
Yeah, work is good, but we have a lot of work. I mean, it's tons.
Good.
Hi, good morning.
So, Prasad, you know Kapil?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know.
Good. That's what I thought. Vaccines, nobody needs introduction to each other.
We're all one family. We're just not married into each other, but we're all one family, I guess. My dad told me we know enough about each other as if we're like a family too. Yeah.
I was just thank God we are not married.
What did you say? Thank God we're not married, huh? Hi, Mahima. You're on
Hi,
mute.
good morning.
You're on mute, Mahima.
Hi, everyone. Sorry. Let's just
Morning. But I think we can all hear each other. A couple of minutes. Malika, so Malika's going to MC and just announce and then leave us alone. We discussed probably how we exchange thoughts during the panel. So everybody is comfortable with the chat on Zoom.
Sorry to interrupt.
Just use the chat on Zoom to connect with each other if we have to. Manu will be on. He is from the organizer group and he's handling the technology. He is the provider of the solution. So, he will handle all the tech part. The audience will not be able to ask us questions like most of us know. And so we just go 1 hour with a moderated discussion. This will get broadcasted onto, through Manu's platform. I don't know if you want to add anything on technology for us. We have 2 minutes.
Just to let you all know that we are live with to the audience now in the auditorium. So,
okay, thank you.
And actually, at your convenience, you can begin the session.
Sure, I will lean on Malika to get us started.
So just let me know when to start.
You can go ahead, Malika. Okay.
Good morning, everyone, and a warm welcome to all. My name is Mallika Kartare, and I work as a Business Development Manager for Nanomedicine Research Group at Institute of Chemical Technology, Mumbai. I am hereby to give a short introduction to the event and session. Again, we welcome and thank all exhibitors, session panelists, and visitors to the inaugural of PHDH virtual event and hope you have visited the wonderful exhibits. Several Indian and foreign companies are participating, and we encourage you to see the displays after the session or at any time till September 25th. We also encourage you to inform to your friends, colleagues to register and participate in the several sessions that are scheduled over the next 3 days. We are aware that there are many foreign delegates in the audience, and we thank them for attending despite the time difference. Proceeding towards the introduction of vaccine sessions, since it began in late 2019, the speed and severity of COVID-19 pandemic has caught most governments, international organizations, vaccine researchers, and manufacturers off guard, who are now trying to develop an effective and safe vaccine in a quick time. Many candidates are under trial. Another important issue is that even if a suitable vaccine is developed, how will it be upscaled and distributed to billions who will need to be vaccinated? To discuss the topical and rather difficult issues, we have panelists from 3 important Indian vaccine companies with us this morning. And Ms. Pushpa Vijayaraghavan, Director of Sadhguru Management Consultant, will moderate this interesting session. I kindly invite her to initiate with the session. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Malika. Appreciate the introduction and glad to have the day start today with this session. I know from discussions with the organizers that obviously this is the most this is the session that everybody's looking forward to most during this 4-day program. But I think more than anything else, it's very critical that we're able to convene to have this important discussion around access and scale up. Just to set the context, I think as of today, the world is closing to almost 1 million cases of COVID-19. It was 967 million as of yesterday, 967,000 as of yesterday, not too far from 1 million. I think back in, I actually very, very strangely remember this conversation early this year when the COVID-19 incidence was just starting in China, a conversation with one of the leading vaccine companies to say, should we prioritize a vaccine, right? And at that point, when we were brainstorming in that discussion, we said, let's just hold and watch. If this is just going to be restricted to, China, there may not be as much of a global demand. But it's very unfortunate we were all proven wrong. And today we're actually staring at 200,000 cases of deaths in the US. India is second in terms of number of cases overall, with about 5.6 million again as of yesterday. The economic impact is also unmanageable. So we're dealing with these complex trade-offs of how do you get the economy back on track. And as per Gavi's estimates, again, more than $350 million monthly loss from an economic perspective because of the pandemic. And at this point, I think every one of us is looking to a vaccine as a most sustainable solution out of this public health and economic crisis of this global magnitude. In fact, just before this, we were chatting that all our panelists have been extremely busy, and we're glad they are, because I think all of us are waiting very, very eagerly for the solution that you hold ahead for us. With that, I will first set stage introducing our panelists. We have Mahima Datla from Biologically, someone of a lot of respect for in terms of how she's built Biologically over the last few decades, completely changed the paradigm of access to pentavalent vaccines in the world. With the kind of access they've created. She's played a steering role in bodies such as Gavi and Developing Country Vaccine Manufacturer Association over the years. Thanks for joining us today, Mahima. Appreciate it. We have Sai Prasad from Bharat Biotech. He's currently the president of the Developing Country Vaccine Manufacturer Association, a very critical body converging the manufacturers supplying LMIC countries. Sai has again played a role ensuring quality of vaccines that Bharat has supplied over the years. One of the initial companies in the 90s to introduce the first recombinant vaccine in India with the hepatitis B, and has set the benchmark in terms of access and pricing. Again, thanks for joining us, Sai. We have Dr. Kapil Mehtal here. Again, substantial experience Indian vaccine industry. Today leads the vaccine and diagnostics effort at Zydus Cadila or Cadila Healthcare. And again, he's a company where he's really steering a very strong vaccine platform technology, a very strong vaccine portfolio from a company with an existing investment muscle, a leading pharma company now transitioned into a formidable force across the biologic spectrum. Thanks for joining us, Kapil. I'm going to request our panelists to set the stage by talking about the COVID-19 vaccine effort in each of their companies. And what is the status of the program? What do we expect in terms of what that means for the Indian public and public at large? We'd love to start off with an introduction about your programs. Mahima, can you go first?
Sure. Thank you for the lovely introduction, Pushpa, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of this forum. I'll jump right into it for paucity of time and just get to where we are with our COVID vaccine development. Before I do that, historically as a company, we've focused a lot on the development side of R&D, and we've partnered with academia, small biotech, and even large pharma for that matter, for the discovery component of R&D, even though we're starting to do some of that ourselves now. So this has pretty much been the case for our COVID vaccine R&D efforts as well. And in this case, we've partnered with more than one academic institutions for largely the development of various clones for the RBD construct. And in our case, these are MIT and Baylor. And what they've been focusing on is really during the early part was developing different clones. And what we've been focusing on for the past several months now is really the down selection of clones and the constructs. So the idea is we use a bunch of parameters largely related to manufacturability as well as obviously immunogenicity amongst other things in order to down select what would be the optimal construct. So that was the early days of COVID development. We're past that now. And one of the reasons we selected RBD, and I keep taking for granted everyone will know what RBD means, but it's really the receptor binding domain of the spike protein, which is responsible to attach itself to the ACE2 receptors in human cells. So that's how coronavirus enters our body. And it's pretty much, I've used this analogy before, it's like a lock and key. So the idea is that smaller the protein, the lesser the side effects, or that's what people anticipate. But it's easier to express these proteins in established platforms. One of the reasons we chose this was because we have a really well-established platform for hepatitis B vaccines, and we've been making several 100 million doses of the same. So speed was key in the case of coronavirus vaccines, and we chose this. The idea is that your body will create antibodies to prevent the lock from entering, to prevent the key from kind of entering the lock. So what we've been focusing on is really the down selection, but I think the biggest capabilities of the company lie in process development, in scale up, in large scale manufacturing, and obviously commercialization. So obviously in the early stages, there's been a lot of back and forth. And while we're doing that, I have to say there's been an unprecedented level of partnership activity across the board. We've all been reading about it in the news literally on a daily basis. What you wouldn't consider usual suspects have learned to partner and collaborate with each other, which is, Sanofi and GSK are an example. Not that they haven't done it in the past, but I have to say I've seen a lot more pragmatism than ever before. In our own case, in addition to partnerships on the early clone development, and that too is the need for speed to have several partnerships, but we've also entered into partnerships with respect to adjuvant evaluation. We believe that an adjuvant will be critical for some of these vaccines, particularly the protein ones. And it's important to see what the persistence will be, because it's unclear what the persistence, or, again, in layman terms, to evaluate how long the antibodies will persist in the body with any given vaccine, what's the boostability. All of these are still unknowns. I mean, we haven't even had the opportunity to learn from other people's failures in that respect. So that's where we're at. We will shortly start phase 1 studies, but we spent a lot of time on the preclinical evaluation, the down selection of the antigen and adjuvants, to be honest. And we've spent a lot of time on manufacturability. So I think once the clinical trials are underway, we would be able to rapidly scale such that by the time we're licensed, we would have very large capacities to offer. So I think I'll pause there if you think that's okay. You're on mute, Pushpa.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for getting us started. And I think the level of effort that's going in is obvious. Look forward to continuing the conversation. Sai, can you give us a feel for what's happening at Bharat? What are the programs ongoing now? You're also on mute, Sai. You're still on mute.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, very well.
Okay, perfect. So, some of the strategies that Mahima mentioned, we're also looking at similar concepts. But we, about 6 months ago or 7 months ago, we took a fundamental decision that, the first wave of vaccinology and vaccine development, we need to be fast, we need to be safe, we need to go to known concepts, instead of new concepts and new technologies and new strategies. So we decided as a first concept that we will try and develop a vaccine with a whole virion inactivated vaccine. That's what we have done, which we were able to go from the clone to preclinical talks and phase 1 clinical trials in a short span of 2 to 3 months. The reason we're able to do that is because our manufacturing platform is well established. We've already made about 300 million doses in that platform. We know how to make live and inactivated viral vaccines. We've made that over several vaccines before. And we also know how to test it. We also know how to do QC, all the other scientific rigor and the quality rigor that's required to put a vaccine out there. So we're able to do that. So we went with the whole virion vaccine, which is Covaxin, which is BBV 152. You would have seen quite a bit of media related to that. So that's now completed phase 1 clinical trials. We are getting ready to submit our data to our Drug Controller General of India. We've also started our phase 2 clinical trials, and in the month of October, we plan to start our phase 3 clinical trials. And in the meantime, we've also done challenge studies with both hamsters and non-human primates. And the data looks extremely good with 2 doses of our vaccine and a live viral challenge about 7 days after the second dose. So most of the pointers are pointing in the right direction. Obviously, the phase 3 clinical trials are pivotal. We need to prove safety and efficacy in that clinical trial. We're targeting about 25 to 30,000 subjects. The sample size estimates are still under discussion based on which sites, which countries, and where we are planning on conducting it. But the general line would be about 25 to 30,000. And we think it's important that any COVID-19 vaccine, for it to be successful, it needs to have good phase 3 efficacy data to show how the vaccine worked in real life and what the safety issues are and what the efficacy issues are. So that is well underway. And in terms of manufacturing, we are already manufacturing product at risk. We have an installed capacity right now. We have 2 different facilities that are both BSL-3 or biosafety level 3 compliant. We can manufacture anywhere between 100 to 200 million doses in these facilities, and we are actively trying to manufacture as much as we can right now because we have the necessary permissions. And we're also exploring strategies to expand the manufacturing footprint, not just in Hyderabad, but in other cities of India and also in other parts of the world. So we're talking with our partners to see if they're able to receive tech transfer from us and to scale up. So if that is, those discussions are ongoing right now in about 4 or 5 different countries. Once those are established, I think we should be able to reach a manufacturing scale of about 1 billion doses a year. And those will all be what we call as distributive manufacturing. They're going to be manufactured in local markets and supplied locally with the same quality and the quality control standards. So that is one strategy, but we also know that the concept that all of us are working on right now, these are intramuscular injections or intradermal injections. They need vaccine, they need syringes, they need needles, they need alcohol swabs, they need a trained nurse or a doctor or a Anganwadi worker or anybody else who is able to administer vaccines, the traditional way it's done. So because of all these issues, and if we have to vaccinate our country, we need about 1 billion units or 2 billion units of syringes, needles, personnel, everything to do these vaccinations. So one of the concepts we are working on, not with Covaxin, but it's another vaccine that we are under development, is trying to develop an intranasal vaccine, because we see that the delivery is key in trying for us to conquer COVID-19, because I don't think that we can conquer this disease by injecting people with our vaccines. We need to think about intranasal delivery systems, and we're working on that already. We've done a lot of animal testing in Hyderabad, in the United States. We have good challenge data already for that second candidate, and we're in the process of now scaling it up and starting to apply for our clinical permissions for that candidate. With that, I'll take my questions off the air. Thank you.
Thank you, Sai. Thank you. I think very, very helpful to understand the approach of parallel programs and initially, taking the lower risk approach. I will turn to Dr. Kapil here. Kapil, I know you all have a DNA vaccine. A lot of people in the audience have questions around, is that safe? There are no approved DNA vaccines. I'll let you talk about your program and demystify that a little bit. I normally encounter a lot of questions on, is this even worth it? Going through DNA vaccine route, I hear it's unsafe. So I think it'd be helpful to add a little bit on the technology end as well.
So thank you, Pushpa. Yeah, I do also get a lot of questions on the same front. And I think the whole thing started in the month of February when the cases started coming. And we decided as a strategy that we should start working as one of the major pharma company in the country on developing a COVID vaccine. In the past, I'll just give you a brief background about the company. We have been working on a lot of vaccines. And in fact, we were the first company to launch the swine flu vaccine in 2010 when a pandemic had occurred in our country. And then we had gone ahead and developed a lot of vaccines which have been indigenously developed for the first time. And some of them are already in the market. Now, coming back to the COVID vaccine, so this, as I was mentioning, the work started somewhere in the month of February. And at that point of time, we looked at the historical data and we found that only the kind of vaccines which has shown significant efficacy for coronavirus infections have been DNA vaccines. In fact, there had been a clinical data for MERS and SARS DNA vaccines which have shown efficacy to the tune of 94% and 80% respectively in the clinical trials. And we thought that we need to work on a vaccine candidate which is safe. So safety was of paramount importance, followed by efficacy. And DNA vaccines per se are considered to be a very safe platform to work on. So that was the reason we started work on. We have another candidate which we have been working on, is on a measles vectored approach. And that candidate would also be entering into preclinical studies in coming months. So the advantage of this candidate has been that it can be made in a biosafety level 1 manufacturing facility. So the technology transfer to other partners is very easy to do that. We have been in discussion with a number of global partners. And we also, as I mentioned, we are also feel that there would be a global distribution of the vaccine as we move forward. Another important aspect of this vaccine candidate is the ease of developing the construct. And we believe that there is a high possibility that there may be mutations in the virus due to the immune pressure once the cases reach a particular threshold. And the vaccine can then rapidly be adopted to switch to a new sequence without any significant impact on the process development, which can be rapidly adapted as well for the new construct. So like what we see in seasonal flu vaccines, there is a strain change every year. And in this COVID vaccine or the COVID disease, we don't know how rapidly the mutations may happen as we move forward. So these were the few aspects which had driven us to work on a DNA vaccine candidate. And we were able to complete successfully the process development of this candidate. We found that the vaccine was able to elicit a very strong immune response in multiple animal species. We tested in mice, rats, guinea pigs, and rabbits. We found the antibodies were able to neutralize the virus completely in a in vitro neutralization assay. Our challenge studies currently are in progress. We also, before going to the clinical trials, we ensured that we had done a complete preclinical toxicity study for this candidate. And we did the regular 28-day repeat tox study in rats and rabbits. And we found that the vaccine candidate was very well tolerated, up to 3 times the maximum intended single human dose, which gave us the confidence to move into the clinical trial. With that, we started our phase 1 trial. And again, in the phase 1 trial, we did not follow the OPD model, but we followed the regular model, which is done for vaccines classically, where the patients are housed in an ICU unit where they were monitored for 24 hours. We had all their blood and biochemical parameters monitored to ensure the safety of the vaccine. And with that data, an independent DSMB approved the candidate to move into the phase 2 trial. And as we speak, the phase 2 trial is currently in progress. We believe the initial results are very encouraging, and we would be completing our phase 2 trial in coming months. And at that point of time, move into a phase 3 clinical trial. The subject size, again, would be in the order what I mentioned. It would be around 15,000 to 20,000 subjects. I think that is important to ensure the safety and efficacy of any vaccine candidate which moves forward. So I think that's where I'll take a pause.
Thank you, Kapil. I'm glad you both took us into discussion on phase 3 and size of trial. As much as the economic impact has been high, there are countries in the world where it's an election year. Unfortunately, a public health response has been quite politicized in several contexts. But that apart, I think there is a question of, there's a lot of curiosity around an EUA for the vaccine. When we're talking of a timing discussion and accelerating the approval, what are we doing today to accelerate the vaccine development? And is an emergency use a good approach to take? Is that something you see happening in a widespread manner? I know it's a tough decision for policymakers because there are trade-offs. But can you talk a little bit to acceleration and emergency use authorization and questions around timing that are quite complex for most people to grapple with when you're saying, when will we have this vaccine? Is that end of 2020 for everybody at large? Is that mid of 21? Is that late 21? And how can we speed up the process? From an industry standpoint, can you educate our audience? Naima, Sai, either of you want to? Yeah.
So in terms of acceleration, I mean, it's really impractical to expect that, a typical development that takes 7-8 years at the very least, and that even if it's a follow-on vaccine, to be compressed into 4 months or 6 months. So the fact that companies are able to respond so rapidly in this case, I think has been that, there are several activities. For instance, you wouldn't do scale-up activities when you're still doing process development. I think majority of us are doing that. You would typically have all your assays not only qualified, but completely validated, end to end before you started any clinical studies. But we're doing that on the go. I mean, as you work to develop, qualify, but I have to say that I don't think there's any shortcuts here when it comes to vaccine efficacy or safety. And majority of the countries, including the US, especially the US, have published guidelines when it comes to their expectations related to both efficacy and safety. And I have to say that there is no notion of emergency use either in US or WHO. WHO, during the early days, there was this idea where post phase 2, you will have emergency authorization. But I think majority of the countries have made it clear that they want to see some efficacy data. As of few days ago, India published its own guidelines, both related to efficacy at a 50% threshold. I think that's in line with some of the countries' guidelines as well. So I would say that when it comes to the actual clinical development part, there has been no no acceleration. What we've been doing is trying to do combining a lot of the evaluation work. So typically you would first do safety and then you would do dose ranging studies to evaluate dose in the second phase. But a lot of us are trying to combine the dose evaluations in the first phase itself, and that gives you another opportunity to be able to accelerate the overall clinical development. At no time have manufacturers contemplated manufacturing at risk that too in the scale that they're talking about. So I think that's also extremely different than when you think about normal developments. You wouldn't make 100 million doses of something and wait for licensure. So that's a huge risk that manufacturers are taking on, and they're able to do so because we've seen push and pull mechanisms both be deployed at a massive scale, and that too very quickly. So I think they're playing a part in in allowing us to evaluate new technologies and allowing us to do at-risk manufacturing and do efficacy studies. I mean, in follow-on vaccines, typically, we've not done the 20, 30,000 subjects, right? Unless it was innovative vaccines. But in this case, majority of the first-gen vaccines for COVID will have to do those kinds of studies, and that too have the networks in order to do them rapidly. So those were the few opportunities for acceleration. Well, I don't recollect your second part of the question, Pushpa. If you could just remind me, I could try to.
Yeah, no, I think largely understanding, kind of receptivity to an EUA approach or level of support for it, and what's being done to accelerate. So.
Yeah, I think that while it's not necessarily the typical EUL that you expect after a phase 2, I think each country will take risk decisions based on that, particularly as, it's really saddening to see so many healthcare workers in the prime of their life succumbing to COVID. And you need that because we already have such a gap in terms of health systems and responsiveness. So, I think each country will make a risk assessment. But as far as the regulations go, there is no notion of emergency licensure that's sort of put on paper that this is the pathway to emergency licensure. At least not that I'm aware of for the US, not for WHO, and India, it doesn't have that notion. But, well into the later part of year or early next year, if there's compelling information coming out of these studies, because you have to remember most of the phase 3 studies are adaptive designs. So they have periodic readouts. And if you have a time point and a readout that is so compelling, the country may decide that, the risk, or the benefit far outweighs the risk. And at that point, decide that it's prime for use, at least for first responders. So, yeah.
I'll steer to, we've been talking about manufacturing at risk. I'll steer to all of you here to understand a little more about that. I think the industry is shouldering the level of risk that we don't really even understand. Right? I mean, normally, and this is published numbers from Gavi, where we're talking about probabilities of success of 7% for a preclinical candidate and 20% for a clinical candidate in a normal vaccine world, vaccine development process. And here we are, putting up facilities of, north of 100 million doses everywhere, manufacturing, stockpiling at that scale to make sure there is wider access. How are we de-risking that? What's the kind of support that's there? How can we expand the scale of this level of capacity creation? So can we talk a little bit to what's happening to trigger that capacity creation, and how can we expand that capacity creation? Because even with what's happening, we're not going to have the volume we need with what's invested today. We're far from having that 10 million doses plus. So what is today supporting manufacturers? What mechanisms are there today to support manufacturers to take on that capacity creation at risk? And how do we expand that? So can you talk from a DVCM perspective before we expand?
Yeah. So I think, there are quite a few mechanisms available, I would say, internationally and maybe part of it within the country for de-risking some of our activities. But we, for the large part, have tried to do this pretty much with internal resources. We've not sought out any kind of external funding, whether it is from international agencies or from, within the government of India sources, because, everything is happening in such a rapid scale and a rapid speed. And, to stop and think, to ask for a grant and wait for funding and wait for, go, no-go decisions. We just don't have time for it right now. And many of us are able to do what we do purely because we have access to facilities and capacities and capabilities that is already established. If somebody is building a facility today to scale up this vaccine, it's going to be at least 2 years by the time that facility comes online, maybe even 3 years. So many of us have existing facilities. We are able to, divert some of this capacity to those facilities. So that's how we are able to do what we are able to do. I don't think we can design a new facility today and construct it. And that won't come to bear, at least, it'll come to bear maybe 2 or 3 years from now, which will be of some consequence, but not a major consequence. I wanted to address one of the earlier points that you made about shortcuts and quality standards and everything like that. In the face of a pandemic, if I was a carpenter, I would try to build a chair. And I'm not going to build a lousy chair just because it's a pandemic. So the same logic for us. We're all vaccinologists. We make vaccines, we develop vaccines, and we distribute vaccines. We're not going to make shortcuts and some compromise on safety or efficacy or any of those other concepts just because it's a pandemic. Eventually, the safety and efficacy have to come through in the clinical trials, and people have to be benefited by it. So that's at least our strategy going forward. Thank you.
Sure, Sai. Kapil, you want to add to creating capacity at scale in the world and how we can scale that up in terms of capacity creation?
Yeah, I think as Sai also mentioned, there are a lot of mechanisms, both in country and globally, which are now supporting both the push and pull mechanism in terms of accelerating the vaccine development. In India, a lot of government agencies like Department of Biotechnology, ICMR, CSIR, DST actually have come very rapidly and have been providing support to a lot of programs to ensure the vaccine development is accelerated. Similarly, globally now this COVAX initiative which has come, which has been supported by CEPI, WHO, Gates Foundation. There has been a lot of commitment, a lot of recent pledging which happened in June. I think a large volume of money was raised, and a large volume of doses have been committed. It's believed that more than a few 100 million doses would be available by end of this year for whichever vaccine is moving forward for global use. And by 2021, over 2 billion doses would be available. I think it's a great initiative which is being taken. Obviously, there has been a lot of critics on the way the allocation is happening on self-financing countries and the countries which would be supported by Gavi. But having said that, I think it's a very good start which has happened. And vaccine is something which has now become a household name. So it's really heartening to see how I think when you go and you see the kids asking when is the vaccine coming, you really feel really happy to see that the field has taken a really big push. And as a vaccinologist, I think it's very important to ensure that the vaccine, whichever comes or whichever is successful, is very safe and effective. Coming to your previous question on emergency use authorization, I think there have been cases where risk and benefit has been weighed upon the introduction of vaccines. And there have been cases where a commercialized vaccine had to be withdrawn when certain adverse events were observed over a period of time. So I think, again, it depends. With the way the cases are increasing, there is almost like, I think, 25% of the population which is at high risk, be it healthcare workers, be it elderly, be it, I think, people with comorbidities, diabetics, hypertensive patients. I think these are the people who would be the one who would need these kind of vaccines. Obviously, safety has to be demonstrated because they would be vulnerable more than the regular population if an ineffective or an unsafe vaccine is introduced. So I think that there has to be a balance, and as the data emerges for the phase 2 clinical trials for the vaccines which are being conducted in the country, I think it will become more evident how the regulators would see whether the vaccine will get an emergency use authorization, at least in a select population, or one would need to wait for a phase 3 clinical trial completion.
Sure. And I'm glad you bring up COVAX. I think, again, not much is known in the broader world, but as we've been debating how low middle income countries get access to the vaccine, especially in the light of the agreements that high income countries have been forging with manufacturers and supply commitments, there is definitely this fear that, if your country hasn't already committed to buy a vaccine, you may not get the supply. So I'm glad, we've got our stakeholders come together to create COVAX. So Mahima, I know you are been involved in the creation of in the oversight committee. So if you can also allude to the mechanism and the aspiration to address, up to 20% of the demand, in terms of what the overall objective is, and what quantum of demand in terms of LMIC, COVAX as a consortium or a program can help serve.
Sure. Really the vision behind the COVAX facility, from the fact that, barring India, China, and potentially Brazil, majority of the developing countries, including middle income and upper middle income countries, they don't lack resources, but majority of them lack the capabilities to do things like tech transfer and scale up of vaccine manufacturing, at least for now. I mean, at least for to be of immediate use. So, the idea behind the COVAX facility is really this principle of equity. How do we make sure nobody is getting left behind? How do we make sure that sort of nationalism doesn't play a part in sort of hoarding the early stage vaccines, and that's only going to increase inequities. But at the end of the day, we're all in this together. You can't sort of immunize everyone in the US and immunize everyone in China and expect trade to still happen all over the world. So, no one can really get left behind. And that's really the principle of the COVAX facility. And what they're trying to solve for is really the most immediate needs, because it's quite overwhelming to think about the long-term needs, at least for financial resources, in order to be able to support these countries. What's different about the COVAX facility, or the way it's being structured, is I think, for the first time, all of these stakeholders have come together to make sure that they're removing obstacles or barriers in their own operating style. So you have large organizations like Gavi, whose core mission is for childhood immunization. You have a large organization like CEPI, whose core mission is really pandemics and so on. But you have these organizations coming together because they recognize the strengths that each of them bring to the table and are able to work together. I think the second thing that's different is Gavi has historically been focused on what we call Gavi eligible countries. And this is really based on the GNI of countries to make sure the world's poorest countries are getting, vaccine subsidy the most. And in order to make sure that they don't get left behind in routine immunization. I think what's COVID's taught us is it's not just the Gavi eligible countries, but even the middle income and upper middle income countries that are facing this. So in a way, that pool is going to be much larger than what you would see in the Gavi eligible countries. And what they're attempting to do is make sure that there is at least a certain percentage of vaccine that gets allocated equitably across these countries. WHO, of course, will be deciding the allocation mechanism criteria based on a population threshold and first responders within that population threshold. And while WHO is going to provide guidance, it will ultimately be up to the countries on that threshold. It remains to be seen how much resources will get, raised for this effort. Those are underway. The June effort was really Gavi's routine business. It was their 5.0 strategy was done. It was for the next 5-year period. That replenishment for Gavi's core mission was extremely successful, but we're talking about childhood immunization here. By the way, I think that's going to have to reset as well. But the COVAX facility is really steeped in the principles of equity to make sure no one gets left behind. What they're also attempting to do is give manufacturers signals with respect to demand, with respect to at-risk manufacturing. But it is going to be a challenge between balancing the risk versus the resources that are going to be available. I think the good thing is there is quite a deep sense of recognition now from people that that not all these vaccines are going to work. So, you know, countries are wary of putting all their eggs in one basket. And COVAX facility gives them the perfect opportunity to place their bets, as you will, against a whole range of horses. I mean, I don't know how a horse racing works, but I'm still going to use that as an analogy. That it's really that, you know, countries don't have to, you know, pick one technology over the other. They have an option of the most, the widest range of technology choices possible, and the widest range of potentially price points possible as well, because, you know, all vaccines aren't created equal, and I suspect they all won't, you know, converge at a similar price point. So that's what the COVAX facility is attempting to do.
Yeah, and it's interesting to note that we had about 78 high-income countries also come forward to participate in COVAX as of now. I think clearly shows the power of aggregation and de-risking.
Yeah, and actually, you know, they view it very much like an insurance policy, in my view, because a lot of these countries that are interested in the COVAX facility already have bilateral agreements with companies that are in various stages of clinical trials. But, you know, it's a good thing that it wasn't a huge setback. But when the Oxford study was stopped, I think it gave pause to several countries to say, you know, should we be de-risking? And I think one of the biggest advantages of the COVAX facilities is you're not single technology dependent. You get a wide choice of products, and you may not be able to cover your whole population, but for the here and now, you know, and you're also being responsible by making sure that, you know, whatever your country's capacity is, you're deploying to be part of the global solution, which I think there's a moral imperative to do. And hopefully countries recognize that.
Yeah, no, I think it's very, very exciting. At least the fact that the Gavi AMC is there to support the Gavi supported countries. There is the whole aggregation mission. Anything else that you, Kapil, want to add on LMIC access, equitable access? You know, making sure there is equitable. You know, people aren't disadvantaged in access to a vaccine for COVID today.
Yeah, thanks, Pushpa. I think, I mean, you know, Mahima was eloquent in how COVAX is set up. And one of the principal reasons for COVAX is to ensure that there is access, you know, throughout the world, irrespective of incomes and, you know, disadvantaged populations. I'm also part of the WHO ACT Accelerator Group, the principals group. We meet every Thursday. We're trying to answer some of those very questions, albeit at a much different level. Having said all of that, I don't think anybody, any one of us or any one of our audience should have any illusions that there will not be differences in access. There will be differences in access for this vaccine. I think it is very naive for us to think that when a vaccine is available, it will be rolled out to all countries and all populations alike. That's not going to be the case because we will not have enough capacities, and countries may not have enough financial support to procure vaccines. So there are a multitude of reasons as to why we think that the access is not going to be uniform. So some people, based on countries' own risk assessments and risk perceptions, will get the vaccine ahead of time compared to others. And in some companies, it will be an economic argument. In some countries, it will be a public health argument. In some countries, it will be a national security argument. So I think it's going to be really a matrix approach, and every country has to decide these issues for themselves. I don't think any international agency or any outside body can convince a country of these things. I think they need to realize that if they are able to vaccinate a certain percentage of their population, high-risk populations, then their country is secure or their national security is safe, or if they are able to vaccinate 20% or 30% of their populations, then the economic recovery could be much faster. So these are realizations that countries should have. And I think their own vaccination strategies and selection criteria for who gets these vaccines will be based on that. Other than that, we as developers and distributors and manufacturers, I mean, we do what we do best. I mean, we can develop a vaccine, we can ensure it's safe and it's of good quality. We can make sure that we get good efficacy data. We make sure that it's WHO pre-qualified and approved by the Indian NRA and other NRAs, and make it available. I think, but eventually, as a vaccine manufacturer and a supplier, we don't know. There are limits to what we can do in, to ensure parity of who will receive these vaccines. Because once we hand over product to the government of India or UNICEF or Gavi or PAHO or the government of Turkey, for example, then it's literally in their hands as to how they want to go about this. We lose that level of control where it goes. Obviously, in the private markets, we can exhibit some amount of control, but again, majority of this product is going to go to governments and supranational organizations, and they will have to determine what is the right strategy, and that will not be a one-size-fits-all. It'll have to be designed based on each country, each region, and their economic and national security priorities. Over.
Kapil, anything to add?
Yeah, I think Mahima and Sai covered most of the points. I'll just add what Sai and reiterate that, yes, as a manufacturer, I think we can just make a safe and an effective vaccine, but how it would be distributed would depend on how our policies and regulations are rolled out. Having said that, so like in the COVAX facility, what I was mentioning, so 20% of the vaccine would be given to self-financing countries who have a much better infrastructure to handle the vaccine. They have a much good epidemiology data to understand what is a high-risk population or a high priority population. But when it comes to LMICs, the challenge comes to the epidemiological data. Major challenge would be on the logistics in terms of cold chain supplies. Some of the vaccines which are in phase 3 clinical trials require minus 80 degrees Celsius storage, which will become a major challenge in these countries to get it distributed in masses. So I think there would be a lot of factors on how the vaccine would be distributed globally, especially in the low middle income countries. But again, it needs to be seen how the distribution starts once a successful vaccine is rolled out.
Sure. So the COVAX is really acting at two ends here, or you've all been alluding to both the push and the pull mechanisms multiple times in this conversation, and both ends of that spectrum are critical. At one end, even the COVAX is really focused on aggregating demand, facilitating access for countries in an equitable manner. But the other end, like Gavi has, I think, done multiple times in the past, it gives manufacturers, a supply commitment. It's giving you visibility and some amount of de-risking for that capacity creation. Just wanted to see if you have any thoughts on what we understand. There's now nine candidates under development, 9 more under evaluation. Do you see number of manufacturers who be supported under such programs expanding? Because I think Sai just reminded us again that we will still not have capacity for everybody who needs it. Can we do more to incentivize capacity creation? And should programs like COVAX bring on board more manufacturers? Because even if we do that, we still won't have enough. Any of you all want to respond?
Yeah, I'll take that.
Yes,
no, I think. See, I would say there is a limit, and there is a risk perception and economic risk that any of us as manufacturers can take, and I think beyond that, I think to the best of my knowledge, whether it's Indian companies or companies from other parts of the developing world, US and Europe, I think they are taking a certain amount of risk, and then the governments and the other agencies are burdening some part of that risk. I think that partnership between agencies and companies such as ours have to increase. Without that, we're not, we're going to take a certain amount of risk, and then we're going to say that's the limit of our economic ability to take risk, and we're going to stop there. But in reality, if we received some proactive funding or push funding, we could be more aggressive. But we have taken a policy decision that being a vaccine company in the developing world, we're not just only for profits, although profits are important, but we also have to have a public health perspective. So based on that public health perspective, we have decided that we can take the kind of risk that we have already taken. We've spent in the hundreds of crores in terms of development. We've allocated facilities for both fill finish and bioprocess. We're talking to other manufacturers in other parts of the world, and this itself is pushing us to the limits of what we can do. I mean, based on the kind of company and the size of balance sheet that we have. And beyond this, I think it's for agencies and governments and entities to think through as to whether they need to accelerate this process and they need to give catalytic funding. Because the situation, what it is right now, it's kind of a cat on the wall situation. I think many entities are looking to see which entity will win, which vaccine will succeed. And I personally think that's kind of absolutely the wrong thing to do, because none of us know which vaccine is going to be successful. We're developing 2 different vaccines at various stages. We ourselves don't know today which is going to be successful and which will really make a difference in public health. So I think it's important that, whether it's a procurement agency or a country or a supranational organization or a funding agency, they need to look at these things and be more proactive and catalytic in their funding strategies. If not, there are going to be situations in COVID also that there are going to be excellent vaccine candidates, but they were not funded in the right time. Either they will not be carried forward, or they would not have invested in the scale at the right time that they should have invested in. And because of that, the vaccine availability would be delayed by a year or 2 years. I think these are kind of the issues and problems that we know, and we have to live with this. I mean, because it's not going to be, it's not going to be a perfect situation for all products and all companies. Thank you.
Kapil, Mahima, anything to add? I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Sai just said. I think just to add another perspective as well is that we really don't know enough about the epidemiology of this disease, how it's going to change or morph over time. So, while there will be a demand supply gap in the interim future, because we at least see, countries' commitment to try to immunize at least a certain percentage of their population. I mean, over time, will there be enough herd immunity where they don't perceive this to be a risk? Will they perceive, will be bucketed in a stockpile pandemic response? Will we transition to routine immunization? And those macro level determinants will be important as we look at, do we need 10 more suppliers or 20 more suppliers? There's like 150 vaccine candidates. Not all of them are going to translate into a commercialized product, but how much more should we invest, or should we stop? And obviously this is true, as Sai said, for each company and their ability to take on risks and diversify risks even within COVID across different technology platforms. But at some point, the macro level factors that will influence demand, I think, will determine how much each company wants to take a risk on. So, and like we don't know which vaccine will work, we really don't know what this virus will transform itself into.
Kapil, you were going to add something?
Yeah, I think what Mahima mentioned, I was about to say on similar lines. As we see, I think almost every day you read a new research article which is talking about a different mechanistic model on how this virus is acting. Now with the antibodies waning off very rapidly for in the infected individuals, and in the vaccines data which is coming out, we see that the antibodies don't last for a very long time. So how important would be a cellular immune response vis-a-vis the immune response? So I think as we are talking about a first wave of vaccines, which would be coming in probably by the end of the year or early next year, there has to be a lot of push and pull mechanism of funding still to be available for late starters. Maybe they are better vaccine candidates who would come as a second generation vaccines. So that kind of a support still needs to be there. Now the pull mechanism for the initial wave of vaccine candidates needs to be built in. At Zydus, being a large pharma player, we started developing an independent facility for this vaccine way back in February. We were very committed to the candidate which we were working on, and we would have a new suit available for this vaccine by first quarter of 2021, which would be able to provide hundreds of millions of doses for the candidate. But again, there is a limit of investment. So now there has to be a commitment which needs to come in for a committed number of doses. And if required, moving forward, the capacities can be further ramped up. I think these kind of pull mechanisms needs to be strengthened as we move forward.
Absolutely. No, I think it's very encouraging. And, you think of the amount of progress we've made in the last few months, what normally takes 10 years, all of you all are shrinking into 12 months, 18 months, 24 months. These are unimaginable timelines. But still, when you look at the macro picture, there's still so many ifs and you can so see that we need more catalytic support, and there is so much that's possible, but it needs more fuel, right? It needs more fuel because there's a high amount of risk of the 169 candidates. We don't know which are going to succeed. We need the vaccine produced at scale, not just developed, and having the efficacy in terms of immunity. So I think absolutely, thank you, appreciate all of that. And in closing, any thoughts on just overall, I think a reminder on core immunization not being forgotten during the times of COVID. If you want to comment on that, I know we spoke about it, and I think it's very important to remind people that there is other vaccines are equally important even today. We can't forget.
Yeah, I mean, there was a recent article published that in India, 30 immunizations are down by 30%. And that's scary because not all states in India had very high coverage rates to begin with. So, at a country level, if you're talking about a third of immunizations being down by that much, it's quite scary. And the Gates Foundation put it very succinctly. They said, in 25 weeks, we've lost progress made that we've made for 25 years, So this is a complete reset. I know that countries have postponed a lot of their measles campaigns, and measles is 10 times more contagious than coronavirus, and it results in fatalities or huge disabilities in infants. So, it's unfortunate that this is the case, but especially in developing countries, immunization has been very community driven. So you've had to, you really deployed people like the Anganwadi workers to go into communities. And there is such a scare about coronavirus and coming into contact with community workers that, we just have to overcome this. What I see happening is all of us as manufacturers and as countries actually have to be prepared for outbreak responses. And I don't mean outbreaks related to corona, I mean outbreaks related to polio, outbreaks related to measles. And manufacturers will have to struggle to respond because outbreak response is not business as usual. We're talking about changes in demand and having flexibility. I think as manufacturers, and we've all had these conversations amongst each other, we're trying our best to make sure that routine immunization doesn't suffer, at least due to lack of availability of vaccines. We don't control the last mile. We don't control country decisions if they want to stop campaigns, but the countries that at least are willing to put, reinforce existing immunization, we want to make sure that we're not diverting all our resources to COVID and letting routine immunization suffer because of different opportunities that are in the short term. And majority of the manufacturers I speak to feel the same way as well, that we have to make sure that routine immunization is supported as much as possible. But it's definitely a reset, and it's not a pleasant one. will have to work that much harder in a much more resource-constrained environment post-COVID. So yeah, and the economic consequences are obvious, but the healthcare consequences could be quite devastating.
Thanks for the reminder, Mahima.
On a pessimistic note, but I just think it's a reality we all have to face and contribute to fixing.
Yeah, no, I think it's a reminder we need, and I'm glad you bring that up, that, vaccines are, for every other vaccine, and even the pipeline ones, for instance, I know all of you all are at it, whether it's a PCV or an HPV or Zika or others, you're not putting other programs, you're prioritizing COVID, you're putting everything you can into it, but we're not setting back anything else in terms of manufacturing priority, but I think as a larger community, that reminder is important. I couldn't thank you all more for joining us this morning. I think it's such a great reminder again of how much industry has gotten done in the short period of time. I think very, very a lot of hope in terms of what you put out in the discussion, that by end of the year, we will have a lot of visibility and possibly some supply, but definitely a lot of visibility and understanding. In 2021 has potential for wide-scale immunization. So I think that is that's encouraging, and I think as a country's community, we're thankful for your efforts. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks so much, Pushpa. Thanks, Sai, Kapil.
Thank you, Kapil. Thank you, Sai.
Yeah, thanks, Pushpa. Thanks, Mahima, and thanks, Kapil. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
To sign off, there is a biomanufacturing panel, I think, after this, for the audience. Enjoy that. I'm glad PDHD is created. I think it's filled for the void in the virtual world of the kind of qualitative interactions we should be having. Enjoy the other panels. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.